Welcome to the Media Roundtable Special Edition. This is where we talk about things that matter to what we call the chief audio officer. That is the decision maker, marketer at a brand who is responsible for the success of what we historically call an audio campaign. Of course, that is getting to be a more difficult thing to explain to people because so much of our conversation is about podcasting, and it's hard to have a conversation about podcasting in 2025 without talking about video. And so we are back where we've been for some time with you with some new developments in our exploration of this question: what is a podcast, and who thinks it is what? There are obviously a lot of thoughts and ideas that we've been putting into the market using this podcast as a vehicle to do that, about how we would define that, what we believe consumers think. But there's a new study that has come out that we're going to be going very deeply into today that talks about what consumers think, maybe even more so than we've covered in the past on this program, and the implications that that has for all of us. I have some very smart, informed people that were the driving force behind this new study, and we're going to unpack all of it for you. Let me get to that in a second. There's a lot happening in this industry right now, and I just want to flag a couple recent stories that I think should be on everybody's radar. The first thing is that Spotify is now announcing that they will be publishing listener numbers, and in a way that may even go beyond what we're accustomed to with YouTube showing view count or Apple showing reviews. They're promising to give us a level of granularity that we're unaccustomed to in this industry, and honestly, I think is welcome by at least where we sit on the agency side. I imagine it's helpful to everybody because what is measured improves, and having that visibility is good for brands. It's good for talent. I don't know if it does anything for the listeners, but hopefully they'll get a better end product as a result. I think there are a lot of business implications with this one. The other thing is a group called Owl & Co., which is led by Hernan Lopez, who's a friend of the show, friend of the agency, friend to all of us, and founder of Wondery, just put out a report on the global podcast economy that goes a little bit further than what you might have seen from the IAB, or when you see a number announced that says something like $2 billion or $2.4 billion in revenue for the podcast industry. According to the research in this report, there is a projected $7.3 billion of annual revenue that we have not yet been fully recognizing today happening in podcasting alone. And I think this is interesting news and relevant news. One of the things when we've been talking about, even just this notion of definitions, is that if we can't agree on what it is, it's hard to measure it. But knowing that we can make some assumptions about what it is, if you do measure, I have said for some time, and this report validates, and by the way, we helped support this report, so I should disclose that. But certainly this came from a lot of sources that go well beyond our resources. But I've been saying that, I think we're undercounting this thing. And I think a lot of us in the business believe that we've been undercounting. And the reason that that's important is because everybody watches the top line number. How much money is coming into podcasting every year? And investment follows that number. When they saw it stall out at the end of the pandemic, and all the projections went from, we're going to be at 3 billion this year and 4 billion next year, and it's billions on top of billions every year, there was a lot of active interest and a lot of investment coming into the space, into infrastructure, into talent deals, into promotion. When you don't have that and everybody says, hold on, we're actually not going to grow so much for the next few years, we're good, which is really what the forecasts have been saying, that puts a squeeze on investment, and that affects the whole ecosystem. So I think this is an important report. Whether or not I could tell you that I think 7.3 is the number, I don't know, but I think it's a lot higher than what we've been saying. And I applaud Hernan for bringing this to the market, because I think it's important content for us to discuss. So, by the way, I'm Dan Granger. I'm the CEO of Oxford Road and Veritone One. We'll be consolidating down to one name in the not too distant future. But that's an episode in and of itself. Enough about me and enough about what I think. I want to talk to you about some people that have taken the time today and gone to great lengths to be here. The first is a longtime friend of the show, friend to me, Steve Goldstein, who's CEO and founder of Amplifi Media. Amplifi is an audio advisory firm specializing in strategy, content development, audience growth, and organizational efficiency. And I'll tell you, when I have a complicated problem, Steve's a guy that I am quick to call. He has developed and teaches the business of podcasting at the NYU Steinhardt School, and has been here recently making predictions for 2025 and contributed to our series, What's a Podcast? Stephen, welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show. Thanks for being with us. And one thing I just want to say before we keep moving is thank you for making the investment that you did into the microphone that you now have, because I think we're now debuting some of the best audio quality that this audience may have ever experienced.
You know, here we are. We're going to spend the whole time talking about video, but ode to the microphone.
Amazing.
Some of us still care. Having Steve Goldstein here is, of course, a big deal, but quite frankly, small potatoes in comparison to our next guest, who is also here, and that is Jay Nacklis. Jay is first time to the Media Roundtable. He's vice president at Coleman Insights, who creates solutions through strategic research for clients to grow brands and develop great content. And like many of us, he has a radio background where he was a program director for several decades, working with on-air talent. And it's been quite a pivot. So there's so much we could even talk about there. But the biggest thing I'd like to say, while Stephen has really invested in his sound quality, Jay was willing to board his dog today at a vacation place so that he would not be interrupted. And you, the listener, the chief audio officer, would have access to nothing but premium audio today with no interruption. So Jay, welcome to the program. This is special.
Thank you. I was happy to make that sacrifice.
We're going to talk about your report, the State of Video Podcasting 2025, published by Coleman Insights and Amplifi Media, which was presented at Podcast Movement. But before we start going through the report, any reaction to some of the stories that have been coming out from Spotify about the measurement, or about Owl & Co.'s report about the size of the industry?
Yeah, the OWL report is a worldwide report. The number that we've focused on, certainly the conversations that we have had, has been U.S. based, and you're absolutely right. That number has been stagnant in the U.S. for a while, although I think the forecasts from the IAB look good. But I think things like this Spotify announcement, where they're going to be publishing actual listen numbers, if that's what those metrics truly are, I think is exciting. I mean, that is a metric that people go to with YouTube. And I think we need to see more real metrics in order for this industry to grow and for advertisers to have the confidence to put their dollars behind it.
Yeah, the more transparency, the better.
Hear, hear. Well, we're here for a purpose, and that's to get to the heart of the content that you have both revealed to the market. And thank you for your contribution to the conversation, because I think we've all been struggling, and we need some consensus, even if it is, even if we don't agree on the letter of every law. I think we need to align on the spirit of what it is we do here in this business. And thank you for contributing to that conversation. I want to start with one of your stats. 85% of respondents say that a podcast can be audio or video. So is this the end of the debate?
Well, it is the end of the debate in the sense that the consumers have made a decision mentally that it can be audio or video. And then they've gone the next step, because 77% of them are choosing between the two at different ratios. Some are more audio-based, some are more video-based, but they are consuming audio and video. And today, calling it a podcast, I do have concerns about how that all plays out over time, but certainly today, I think when Jay and I look at these numbers, what we see is you win elections at 85% pretty handily.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and also the difference between the two studies, right? The one that we did in 2023 and then this one, only a year and a half apart. The increase that happened on that was pretty staggering. Going from, it was 75% in 2023 to 85%, 10-point jump in a short period of time. That's a pretty big jump, right? And what happened was the younger part of the podcast consumers, they were kind of already there in that definition. What happened was the older consumers, those over 35s, they fell in line. Like in a very short period of time, they got to the same place in that definition where they were much more likely to say audio than the younger consumers.
But why did they fall in line? I mean, I'll throw out just one random theory that could be a slice of the pie. When we saw the shift from gated content now being pushed everywhere, everybody was going for Spotify particularly. And if we just talk about Rogan, knowing how much he makes up of the ecosystem, like the fact that they had him limited to distribution on Spotify, which people continue to associate with audio, when the push went onto YouTube and he started bringing in the massive numbers he saw, and you have others following suit. Is that potentially one of the drivers here, or what do you think it is?
Totally. I mean, the content, well, let's go back. When we did the first study, and Jay and I say this every time we talk about this thing, and I think it's worth mentioning. When we did this study, there were 2 sessions at Podcast Movement 20 months ago about video, and we were one of them. And we were on the last day of the conference as a keynote. And then this time around at Podcast Movement, I mean, we all know that every session had a video discussion at some level or another. So that's how fast it's occurred everywhere. But in line with that, more and more content producers have gone on to YouTube or placed their content on YouTube. And so the audience was hearing that from the hosts, that the content was available on yet another platform, a video platform, a place they most likely already were. I don't think it's that podcasting sent a lot of people to YouTube. I think they were already using YouTube.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I know this jumps to another part of the discussion, so we don't need to dive into it now, but social media is just a big part of this too, because in that year and a half, you've seen social media play a more important role in discovery. And you're also seeing more creators use social media for discovery, and all the AI tools that have come about in just the last year and a half that makes it easier to create vertical videos. So when you have more consumers seeing these options on social media, then you're going to have more people accept it as video because they're seeing those as video, right?
Okay, I'm going to drill deeper here. So we talk about the 10%, and that's a meaningful number. How many consumers do you think that represents? Ballpark.
The 10% of, I'm not sure which number we're talking about.
The 75% that went to 85%.
The 10 points. Right.
Yeah.
And so what was the question about it?
How many people is that?
100.
100.
Well,
yeah. No. I mean, but the projection. I'm saying, how many people does that represent? Right. Sorry. That's my question. Are we talking about, does that mean there's 1 million incremental people, 10 million incremental people? What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's a number I could necessarily project that out to off the top of my head.
I think the way to look at this one, Dan, is in the inverse.
Mm-hmm.
Only 15% do not identify podcasts as audio or video.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about it that way and you project it to the population, and this survey was done in the U.S.,
mm-hmm.
that's a big, massive, giant number.
So if there's I'll try to go back of the napkin math with you. If half of U.S. consumers consume podcasts and 10% more of those change the way that they define it, we could argue that we're probably talking about potentially 10 to 20 million people may have changed their view. And I think what you're saying, and look, I'm making that up. I wouldn't document it, but just to frame the discussion, that's a lot of people that are changing their thinking. And what I'm hearing from you both is that if there's 2 drivers behind that, one is the content that has become available on YouTube that may have been limited before, or content that so audio content that is moved to YouTube, or it is YouTube content that is being classified differently and thought of as a podcast that may not have been framed that way. But then you're also saying social media is a big driver as well. And when we talk about social media, can we break that down a little bit? Because that could mean a lot of different things.
Well, the big finding, just flipping to the chart, the big finding is that that all of the short form social media performed exceedingly well. YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, TikTok. By the way, TikTok was number 3 or 4. Which was it?
TikTok was 4. It was YouTube, Shorts, Reels, then TikTok.
Yeah. So, immediately when we think of short form video, we default to TikTok, and yet these other forms are ahead of it, not by a ton, but substantial enough.
Well, and if I'm a creator, I'm really thinking about that seriously, because that means the promotional capabilities of social is critical. And so when we're referring to that as a driver, how much of that is YouTube within YouTube versus social media outside of YouTube, do you think?
Well, the stat that we have on YouTube is that 60% of the people are using YouTube and seeing some of that. And then you layer in YouTube Shorts on top of that. I mean,
right.
Another 40%, not another 40%, but 40% are also seeing podcast content on YouTube Shorts. So massive would be the word.
Yeah, and I mean, there's the advantage that Shorts has because they're keeping it in the ecosystem, right?
Right. And that's where I'm going with the question, right? I'm trying to figure out, if I'm trying to get more people to listen to the Media Roundtable, as we always are, is it really about getting them from promoting one part of the platform, pointing them to the other, or does it make as much sense to be looking externally at other platforms to get them to jump? I just wonder if it's really YouTube driving that number for itself.
I think it's a little bit of both, but I think one is, some of it is because one we're talking about is tactical. It's how do you move them directly to the episode, but then there's obviously the brand awareness of the other, where you might not necessarily get a direct link, but that doesn't mean that it's not effective over time, right? And the other thing is one thing that I thought was interesting when you extrapolate out that discovery with social media among like Gen Z, if you look at that under 30, the gap between social media is number 1 next to friends and family. It's a much bigger gap. So, they're using social media in a much bigger way. And then, not surprisingly, TikTok has bigger influence. Reels has bigger influence there as well.
Yeah. We had the Midas Touch brothers on recently, and it was interesting because they're such great marketers of their content. And they were talking about how they have specialized promotional strategies that they use in all forms of social media. And they described it as like an orchestra, and every different platform is its own instrument. And so you need to be promoting something on Instagram in a very different way than you need to be doing on TikTok, than you need to be doing on YouTube. So it all kind of bears out, but it seems like a lot of the recent winners in audience acquisition are figuring out how to kind of make all of these channels really important for the growth of the business.
I think that's a really important observation. I met with the Flight Story people recently, Stephen Bartlett's people, and they are pushing on the algorithmic, and they are trying to master. I don't even know if trying is the right word. They are mastering. It's evolving all the time, right? But they are working hard to maximize their shows using these channels, and I think you're going to see more of that everywhere.
Yeah, and that business is one to watch. I mean, what he's been able to build, and I think he has a background in marketing. He's gonna come out to one of our events in a couple of months, and we'll get to know more about their story. But I'll tell you what, the number of times they've come up in conversation internally in the last couple of months is significant shift. They're really doing some interesting work, and one to watch. Okay, so I want to talk about a partner to our agency and really a partner to creators worldwide. There's a company called Libsyn. Libsyn means liberated syndication because they have been making it possible for people to podcast and make their voices heard everywhere, regardless of if they have any kind of network or publisher backing. For more than 20 years, they basically created the category. They have been the source of innovation with pioneering tools in content publishing, measurement, and monetization. And we do a lot of business with them. Libsyn Ads is a wonderful way for brands to connect with audiences through podcasting. And they have a monthly reach of, get this, over 200 million listeners across thousands of creators and representatives. Libsyn Ads delivers solutions from premium host-read sponsorship across all categories, and they have programmatic, but also do the episodic endorsement-based buys. You can take advantage of their reach tools. They have a number of different tools that you would expect from an enterprise platform, and they offer customization and the personal touch of a bespoke shop. And I know I'm reading copy points here to you, but I just do want to say we have a very close relationship with Libsyn, and we think that they provide a very important role in the ecosystem because they are really the leader in making sure that everyone always has a voice and a platform. We know that platforms are great. They're an important part of the plan here. But we still believe in the meritocracy and as I've said so many times, podcasting is the greatest canvas in media for the free and open exchange of ideas. But that's only true if somebody's willing to give all voices a platform to be heard. Libsyn makes that possible and has for some time. And they've made many of our clients very, very successful. If you want to get started, go to advertising.libsyn.com to speak to a Libsyn podcast advertising specialist. And I'm going to say it again, advertising.libsyn, LIBSYN.com, advertising.libsyn.com. Check them out. That helps understand what's driving some of this. And then let's just talk about Spotify for a second. We know how big they're pushing into video. And we also know that they are, regardless of their efforts, they're still being thought of as an audio channel, right? What does that tell us?
Well, I mean, two things come to mind for me. One is, and it's early in the game, right? Spotify has really only aggressively been pushing video for months, not years. And so the jury's going to be out on whether or not this works. We could be a year from now sitting here and they said, this is another initiative that is not going to be something we're going to keep going on. Who knows? The biggest barrier for Spotify is simple brand perception. It's why YouTube is going to accelerate, and there's more than one reason, but YouTube is going to do well at video podcasting because they are seen first as a video platform, and audio is how Spotify is seen. They've traditionally been an audio platform. And so trying to change people's behavior, to say, hey, we want you to use us for video when you're using them for audio, that is easily going to be just the biggest block is consumer perception.
So you feel like the perception is even larger than the interface aspect. Like you're saying they could have a mirror image of YouTube when you open up the Spotify app. And just because of the way that people think about that brand, that's going to be the largest limiting factor.
Yes, but they're also behind the eight ball on interface perception, because that's something that we asked about when we did a face-off of YouTube versus Spotify among those that consume podcasts on both. And in almost every every attribute that we tested, people found YouTube to be the easier to use platform, the easier one to discover new podcasts. Everything about it, YouTube won. So that is another it's another big change. YouTube or Spotify doesn't just have to change their perception to say, hey, we're also a video platform, but they also have to improve their perception from an interface perspective.
And anecdotally, I talked to my NYU class. So these are all Gen Zers, and they are all, very active and shrewd and smart on all of this stuff and intuitive. And they certainly are aware that Spotify has video tools, but they comment about how hard it is to get there as opposed to the simplicity of YouTube. And I think it's also worth mentioning that this is the land of the giants. I mean, we're talking about YouTube, which wants to be more like Netflix, and Spotify wants to be more like YouTube, and they're all chasing each other.
And Netflix wants to be more like iTunes or Apple Podcasts.
Netflix is almost inevitably going to be in the podcast business, video podcast business, pretty soon. And
so we're just chasing each other in circles.
Oh my God.
But it's like the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and they're just
totally. But the statistics that were published by YouTube back in December of 400 million people consuming video podcasts on large screen TVs was something that informed some of the questioning that we did, and it bore out in our study too that this is a thing. So people are putting or using YouTube as a network. And if you look at Nielsen's own data on consumption of video, you'll see that YouTube now dominates past Paramount and Disney and Comcast as just TV. And so here come video podcasts into this giant machine. And so now that's just a part of what people are doing when they're watching in their kitchen or their living room or wherever they might have a bigger screen. Truly, most of podcast consumption is still mobile. And even on YouTube, it's still mobile. So that's vertical versus horizontal. But I do think we have to have a horizontal discussion for a lot of the content that's coming down the pike in podcasting.
Confusing stuff. Tell me about what does this matter if I'm a brand, if I'm an advertiser budgeting for this channel? What does this mean to me?
I think it's kind of cool. I think it's great. I think that there's distribution on multiple platforms. I mean, you and I have had this discussion. The folks at NBC have long moved past the notion that it's going to be watched on Channel 4, and they're pumping it through their apps and their cable channels, and they are putting it on YouTube, and they are going to the advertisers, and they are selling circulation. They are selling distribution, and it's hard. You know far better than I how hard it is, but it's where you have to chase the audience. And that's what the big media companies are learning how to do. And that's what podcasting has to learn how to do.
Yeah. And for years, when you looked at how people consume podcasts, audio podcasts was always dominant in home. And the on-the-go number, particularly the in-car number, was always lower than it should have been. And so what we're seeing in video podcasting is that people are starting to really use video podcasting at home like TV shows, right? They sit down and they watch it. And that is kind of taking the place of audio, but that's okay because audio is growing in the places that it should be growing. Commuting, at work, walking, exercising, right? In the car. So to me, from a brand standpoint, back to your original question, Dan, it's really a great thing. And it's great for the medium overall, because now you're talking about an all-day medium that people are using it contextually in different places. If I'm a brand, I can reach consumers in different places doing different things. So I see it as a real additive thing for the medium.
Look, I agree on behalf of, our clients. The opportunity is growing, and that's great. That's great for us. It's great for the brand. The problem that I think brands are having that we see is, frankly, it's just people tripping all over each other, knowing how to classify and how to decide, is this, does the dollar come out of this pot or another pot, and having to compete across different business units and different budgets because we don't have that clarity. Any suggestions on how we as an industry think about helping solve that issue?
Well, I think two things. First, we are very consumer focused, so that is our viewpoint all the time. Is what are the consumers doing and how to reach them? So that's what this study, of course, is all about. And the second thing that I think about a lot is making it easier for buyers. And podcasts have done a terrible job of making it easy for buyers because they've hidden the numbers.
Right.
Everybody has their own private numbers, and downloads are not particularly reliable anymore because of the way it's consumed on a different platform. So, if you want to make money, you have to figure out how to get in front of the advertisers and say, these are reputable numbers. This is describing the situation in the marketplace today, and you could buy with confidence. Yeah. But the more we're playing whack-a-mole with this, you certainly understand why there's a hesitancy among agencies to put dollars into the business.
Understood. Okay. Consumers are not binary, as your study suggests. 77% are switching between audio and video. Does this flexibility help, or does it create more problems?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would go back to the point I made a minute ago, which is I think it helps. I mean, to Steve's point, it creates, I would imagine, more complex dynamics from a buyer side, certainly, right? But from the consumer side, it's amazing because you've got different ways to consume your favorite show, in different places and different ways.
Well, and this is why we're advocating for an open podcast measurement protocol, because in addition to the confusion about who's budgeting toward what and what is a podcast, does it have its own budget, you get past that hurdle, and the next one is great. It's really nice that somebody switched from one app to another, depending on, what they were doing, because when they got on the road and they just wanted to take in the audio version, that's all cool, except that the same episode now has to be measured using different instrumentation. So you literally have somebody sponsoring a show that has X number of impressions, and then you only get to measure those impressions for the part that may have been consumed when they were in their living room watching on their TV, but then didn't get went to a totally different thing when they got on the road. And the advertiser has to try to make sense of all that and marry those two data sets together. It's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. So if we want to not be a $7.3 billion and growing industry, we should keep doing that, I think. Any commentary on how we find our way out of something like that?
Well, I don't think it's easy. I don't think that there are magic solutions, but I am so comfortable in saying that you have to follow the audience. I know that sounds a little broken record-ish, but it's the job of the advertisers and the agencies and the ecosystem to follow that audience and figure out how to monetize it. And it is not a podcast issue. It is a media issue. This is occurring with every media platform.
I was just going to add, and whether we like it or not, the platforms are consolidating in a pretty dynamic way, right? So we're living in a YouTube, Spotify, and Apple world, but really YouTube and Spotify in a consumption, from a consumption standpoint. And I would say it's good that we're seeing, in the year and a half since we did the last study, we're obviously seeing some progress from, like with you talked about Spotify and the listens. YouTube, I mean, by their own admission, 20 months ago, we talked to them and there was very little information that they were putting out. They weren't putting out, helpful things that much for creators. And I do think it appears that in the last, I would say 18 months that, they seem to be more open to changes. And I'm hopeful that they continue to try to find things to make it easier, because they have a lot of control in that space, right?
So we've been making overtures since podcast movement, and I think finding some signs some reason for hope that both Spotify and YouTube are interested in reducing this level of friction. Now, how, if, when, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? But I like, right now I'm feeling a little bit hopeful, and I want to stay there and continue to advocate, because I think, by working together and creating standardized metrics, not only do they help the industry, they help themselves. Right. They make it easier to buy. We have brands that will literally not buy a simulcast because of all of the confusion that it introduces to their lives. And I don't blame them. It's worth it to me to try to hash through it and triangulate to reliable metrics. But it's a treacherous path.
We spent 6 years working with the Ramsey organization, Dave Ramsey's organization. Yep. And one of the things that we learned was the audience was different on each platform. So the radio audience skewed one way, the podcast audience skewed significantly younger, the video audience consumed the content differently, and then they started cutting it up from there. That expanded the reach of the Ramsey organization substantially. And that's, I think, the aspirational hope for many creators, podcasters, that they will not view this with the same confusion that the advertisers are, but they're going to intuitively understand that they are able to increase their reach substantially, which theoretically should bring them greater revenue.
Indeed. Okay, so you're both programmers with some breadth of experience there. If you're thinking about content that is rising on the big screen, how does that change your strategy, especially knowing that people are toggling? Like, what advice do you give to creators in how they navigate that change?
Well, you've got the 5-second rule, especially in video, but you have it in audio too. I think, people are scrollers. Mm-hmm. We call it TikTok brain. Mm-hmm. Only 6% of anything that's on TikTok is, really reviewed. It's just scrolled past. And I don't know what those numbers are in the podcast world yet, but I certainly know that there's less patience. And so for most shows, not all, but for most shows, they need to be better at the beginning. They need to be more attractive. And in general, mediocre content is just going to get crushed in this.
Yeah, that's true. I would say, though, that not every show has to be Diary of a CEO on your smart TV, right? It doesn't have to look like a movie necessarily. And I don't want smaller creators that don't have the same amount of resources to get discouraged to say, well, I shouldn't do video because more people are doing smart TV. Therefore, this is a bad idea, because I think that's wrong. Because I think that YouTube has also trained people to say, like, a lot of people do shows on their iPhone, and there are AI tools that can make it look, great, and it could be just fine. And so it doesn't all have to look like a movie. It does up the game to a certain extent, but I don't think it should be completely discouraging either.
And the shows that we see with the students at NYU are often very raw. They are underproduced, and that's part of the attraction.
Yeah, they like that.
That's right.
Isn't it amazing that, COVID got everybody to loosen up and make exceptions, and then it turns out that the quick and dirty actually has some advantages? But then what do you say to the Flight Story folks and others that put so much into the production?
There's room for both. I mean, Jake Shane is one of those podcasts, videos that are very raw in production. Emma Chamberlain, very low grade production from a very high grade actress, intentionally so. It creates an intimacy, and it also looks different than everything else that you see. And yes, that is intentional.
And is there any guidance you would give to a marketer who's trying to figure out how to leverage one experience over another?
Well,
Some shows are going to be better in audio form, and some shows are going to be better in video form. I don't think everybody's numbers are going to be great on both platforms.
Well, I'm thinking more tactics like, how important is it? Do you double down on say effect and have them doing visual demonstrations, knowing that they may hop in the car and not see it? But then if you don't, you miss that opportunity.
I think that there's a risk of alienation of the audio audience, especially if the shows start pandering to video, and I hear some shows doing that. I also think some organizations are flipping into video first organizations, and that sort of that makes me wonder about who gets to use the word podcast and whether that resonates.
And I'll just give one analogy, like to the point you were just making, that I sometimes give, which is, it's a sports analogy where, you had all professional sports teams always used to have their audio team and their TV team, right? The radio and the TV team. And then radio teams got cut all over the place. And so, our hometown NHL team, for example, it's the same team that does TV, and then they just simulcast it on the radio. And there are times, right, where you hear the call and they're making reference to something in the game that if I'm listening to the audio, I can't see what they're referencing because they're making a visual point to it. And so we really do have to be careful contextually to that point, that there are still people that are using assuming you're doing both, if they're contextually using the audio format, you've got to be very, very careful that it's made for them and that you're not, going into a video first context when they're using it audio.
Well, and that's very challenging, right? And when you're trying to cater to both, knowing that you may not be able to control which one they see. But I think, as we get standardization and you can have a little bit easier trafficking of this iteration is going to go on video and this is the audio only version, right? But that's challenging. So let me invert the conversation a little bit and talk about what does all this mean for audio? Is there a place for the audio only podcast, and how large by percentage of the market opportunity does that even represent anymore?
Well, the data that we have from the study shows 16% of the overall study is audio only. However, if you add the mostly audio users to that, which I think is fair to do, you get 46% that are leaning toward audio. So when we were tabbing this stuff, Jay and I kept talking about making sure that the audio story was loud and clear. And the story is there's a lot of people who are consuming audio.
Yeah. And they're still doing it. They're not going to watch a video in the car. There's still going to be an important context for that. There are categories that will remain more conducive to audio listening than video.
Like what? Let's talk about that. Who should stay audio only?
I mean, fiction is a great example of that, right? Narrative storytelling is an obvious one.
A lot of news.
A lot of news, depending on the format. I mean, that can be video too, but depends on the format. Yeah, I mean, and there's something else I was going to add to that, but
what I keep wondering is, the metaphor I keep using is, I don't know if you can see it, but I got the 405 behind me, and you got like 6 different lanes, right? And I feel like these platforms, whether it's Spotify or YouTube or anything else, I hope that they keep an audio only lane open so the consumer can decide that either A, they just want the audio version, or B, they can have access to shows that are only available through audio, and that we don't snuff out that part of the market. Because if I was doing something like audio fiction, this is a very discouraging time to get into the business.
That's a really important point. So the chat show format of, whether it's in a Zoom environment or whether it's an in-studio with a couch and a couple of microphones, that seems to be dominating the day, especially as things move toward video, which is not good for narrative. It's not good for scripted content. also, and those are inexpensive to produce. So you could see why the marketplace is moving there. And so I think it does put into danger some of that kind of content. I'll give you another example. I had somebody from the NYU Journalism School come speak to the class, and they were asking about This American Life. And none of the students listened to This American Life. And it shocked the professor, shocked me a little less, but still the warning sign was loud and clear that that kind of content is not what they expect from podcasting. They expect it to be the chat shows. So does that mean they wouldn't enjoy it if they listened to it? I don't know. We weren't evaluating.
I'm going to give you a mini rant on this, which is, look, I worked in talk radio for, before doing all this stuff. And, the thing that I understood about that audience, which is effectively the business that we're in podcasting, right? Let's be honest.
40 years younger, but yes. Okay.
40 years younger, but it's the new version. Here's my rant. People don't really get concerned about the types of grown-up issues that are better served by audio native content, typically until they're about 35 years old, start having kids and a mortgage. Mm-hmm. That's when they vote. That's when they're mad about the politicians. That's when they might know who a local politician is. And so sometimes I wonder if we get stuck going, well, the kids don't do it this way anymore, and we got to follow the kids because they're the future. But the reality is the kids haven't, fully baked yet and found out that they actually need Ira Glass in their lives. But they will, right? And so the question is, do we cater to that, or do we wait for that?
Tough call.
Tough call. All of this stuff is a tough call, isn't it? These are difficult times. Okay, I'm going to try to move us along quickly here. One quick one. 93% of creators in your study say that video podcasting, the reason they do it is to grow their audience, but 53% that it's at least somewhat difficult. Okay, so give me the negative on this. Who does this hurt? The fact that we know that there's the appeal of more promotion and more audience gains, but the burden of the extra production, who does that affect the most?
Well, I mean, it's probably a little bit scary and overwhelming with all of these options and the feeling that you have to get into it. But there seems to be a recognition among creators that it's going to be good for the brand. It's going to be good to grow their audience. But at the very least, trying to find a way to use some tools, to use it for discovery, and get it out there, using some of these tools, I think is going to be, I don't know. What are your thoughts, Steve, on this?
None of those numbers bothered me, and they didn't surprise me. I guess maybe the surprise was that it was as low as it was. In other words, these people are saying, yeah, it's not so easy, but they're doing it. And yeah, it's a lot more work and a lot more time. And if you're a solo podcaster, this is an onerous amount of work. And if you're a small organization, it's certainly running your costs up on how to produce these things, and you'll get smarter, and you're forced to. I mean, I think about this going back to the radio terms. You get smarter and more sophisticated with the tools that you have of value around you, AI being one of them. But, I look at tools like Descript. What a magnificent tool that is for creating audio and video content almost seamlessly. I mean, just remarkable. So that makes it a lot better than it was even 2 years ago.
Right. Or Opus Clip for example, to create vertical video. I think if we ask this question of creators a year from now, I think it'll be fascinating to see the differences and how they feel then.
Some of the things that I've heard on this subject are, one, it's harder on the little guy. If you have less production resources, that's a thing. If you don't have the resources to compete in promotion on social, it's hard to do it all. It's hard to keep up with the Joneses when you've got a lot of resources going behind some of these programs. And so some of the meritocracy may be going away. You also have, some people have said that there's a higher expectation on women for how they need to present themselves on a video, and that may be discouraging. Some people may say that they don't feel confident with how they look on screen, regardless of gender. And so, whether or not that's, a theory or a real thing, I think it is something to pay attention to. And I think that's why it's important when we're talking about this, just that we continue to surface this notion that we still need another lane. And I don't care if 90% of the consumption is hybrid or whatever, we have to, keep space open, because I think there's a lot of content we won't get if we force the expectation of video on everybody.
Well, and let's call it out the way it is. I mean, there are 500 hours of video posted every minute to YouTube. That's new video. There's 3.7 million new videos every day. And there's 100,000 tracks, music tracks, added to Spotify every week. I mean, these numbers are so huge on the creator's side. And so I think about the audio lane and think it's something that podcasters need to continue to pursue and master, because that's going to be a little less competitive than this giant pile of video in the YouTube environment.
Yeah, and there's there are smaller creators that may not reach a mass audience, but can absolutely reach niche audiences, and that really rely on them. And I would hate to see, back to your point, Dan, I would hate to see a creator that isn't comfortable for whatever reason, and some of the reasons that you mentioned, being on video, or they just decide, look, I don't have the bandwidth for it, for them to say, well, then I'm not going to podcast anymore. To me, that would be a disastrous outcome.
Yep. I know we're almost out of time here, but I want to give you one more jump ball. What did we miss? What's important, particularly for the marketers that are thinking about their way of engaging with this industry? But even if your feedback is broader than this, what do you feel like came out of the study that should be underscored here?
Well, one of the things we didn't talk about, and you've seen this in other research, is there's still, from a brand standpoint, there are still not that many big brands in podcasting. And I'm not talking about advertising, I'm talking about shows, right? As we know, it is Joe Rogan and everybody else. And for podcasting to move forward as a medium, it is going to need to develop bigger brands that more people know, quite simply. When you ask on an unaided awareness question, how many podcasts can you think of, whether or not you consume them? If the only number that goes above 10% of podcast consumers is Joe Rogan, I think that's not great. And I think that one of the potential good things about the rise of video podcasting, strictly from a brand standpoint, is it gets shows into more places, right? It gets the opportunity to the rise of social media, people seeing, because that's a whole nother thing, right? If I see a vertical video clip of a podcast, have I consumed a podcast? Well, I've seen it. And from a brand standpoint, I think that's really important. Podcasters often get so focused on the tactical and how do I game the system? How do I get an extra stream? How do I get an extra download? And so to me, one of the big takeaways remains that we've got to work on growing bigger brands.
And so you want to see more celebrity chat shows, it sounds like. You don't feel that we've had enough of that.
That is not at all what I
said. Well, but I think that there is that unintentional element. I mean, that if you don't have a megaphone, it's really hard to have your content surfaced. I got to tell you, I'm moving in another direction here. I want less content. I want more of these marginal shows to go away. I know I should be advocating for choice, but choice is clogging the pipes here. And so I'm not suggesting that there can only be a one Joe Rogan and then that's it for podcasting. Not at all. I'm suggesting that there's another level of content that's sitting below there that's not able to break through because there's so much other undercurrent.
I think that's where it has to go, right? I mean, you have these industries, and the perplexing thing is that now you have professionals in those industries, and then you have all of us. And I think about it like I think of podcasting like email newsletters. It's something that any of us can send to anybody. There is zero barrier to entry, but it's different to say that you're a news publication and that you have a standalone business that supports. And it might be helpful to have a line of delineation. I'd hate to be below that line, and we might be below that line based on the type of work that we do. But still, for the consumer, I agree. There's so much out there. How do you know? It's very hard to disentangle what's worth your time.
Well, I think hits are hard. They've always been hard.
Yeah.
Now it's even harder. But Jay hit on this, and it's a really important thing. There's riches and niches. If you have expertise in a particular area and you can figure out how to capture an audience, whether it be audio or audio and video, that's where there's money. But it's not agency money. It's not the linear sort of dollars that you're used to. It's specific dollars trained in a particular industry. And I do think that that's a huge opportunity for people who have expertise, not people who just want to create content.
Right. Find passionate fans of your content and super serve them.
I think that's a good way to close. I guess final question would be, Jay, what is your dog's name?
Daisy.
Daisy. Will you please thank Daisy for the sacrifice that she made today to make this conversation possible? And thank you, Stephen, for the great sacrifice you made to bring the level of audio quality that you've done here today. This is a great day for the medium. And I thank you both.
Pleasure to be here. Always good. And why is it always a blue sky out there behind you?
Oh, because I'm in Los Angeles. It's always a blue sky out here. You didn't know?
No, what did you do during
and a favorable tax climate? I'm surprised you don't live here. Thank you for taking part in this conversation on the Media Roundtable. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road and Veritone One, where we want you to succeed in audio, podcasting, and creator-based media and use your influence for good. We have a great opportunity in this business to not only build our businesses, but to build bridges across differences through the way that we conduct our discussions. If you're a marketer and you're looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road or Veritone One, but you can go to oxfordroad.com and subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. It's free. And we'd love to hear from you. If you have feedback, info@mediaroundtable.com. Don't forget to check out Ad Infinitum, which is our creative focus podcast led by Stu Redwine. You hear famous voices and pure audio brilliance from people like Stephen Goldstein on that program. So I strongly recommend you tune in. Guys, how do people get in touch with you? Steve, you go first.
Amplifi, AMPLIFI, media.com.
And our website is Coleman, COLEMAN, insights.com.
Well, thank you again. And thanks to Pete, Haley, Ruby, Bianca, Kyle, Ezra, Mary Jane, Everett, Neil, Sean, and the team at Podcast One. As always, influence responsibly.
Find yourself looking for a new job or change in career? Monster.com is here to help. We are not only here to bring you job postings, but also AI interview prep and salary tools, expert career advice, and top-notch resume services. We've got everything you need to land your perfect job fit. Discover the magic of finding the ideal job with Monster.com. Your future starts now. Visit Monster.com today. Your next job opportunity is just a click away.